reminder to everybody present here that the Poetry Cafe readings will be beginning at Max Muller Bhavan from 6:30. We also have Ravish Kumar, who will be in conversation with Urvashi Bhutalia at Allen Park from 6:30. Alongside that, our next session, Boys Don't Cry, a discussion on masculinity and gender with Mahesh Dattani and Greer, Jhuma, Basak and Sandip Roy will be commencing from 6:30, so please do stick around for it. I would just like to take this moment to thank some of the sponsors and partners for our event, including our knowledge partner NSHM Knowledge Campus, our institutional partners British Council, Getty Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Development Consultants, Allios Fra, Tolly Club and Kolkata Center for Creativity, our entertainment partner Inox, our decor and event partner Navkreet Brand Solutions, and our photography partner Studio 15. The theme for AKLF 2019 is Let's Celebrate Park Street, to which effect I must thank our partners for Let's Celebrate Park Street, which include the Park Hotel, Flurries, Thai Spa, Don Giovanni's, Berger Paints, Reliance Digital, and Nexa. We will be beginning with the next session very shortly. Who, as has been described before, is a playwright, director, and actor, whose plays have been known for their exploration of the ideas of gender, performativity, and social relations. His most acclaimed work, Final Solutions, made him the first individual to win the Sahitya Academy Puraskar in 1998. He will be in conversation with Andrew Sean Greer, an American novelist, who has been the recipient of the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction for his latest novel titled Less, which was released in 2017. The session will be moderated by Sandip Roy, who is an award-winning author and journalist, widely known for his contribution to numerous anthologies, as well as Jhuma Basak, who is a psychoanalyst and academic, who has had international publications in journals and books translated into various different languages, along with papers that she has presented at various IPA congresses across the world. For further details about our panelists, please do visit our website, www.aklf.in. I shall now hand over the proceedings for this session to our moderators.
Thank you for being with us in this wonderful winter evening. Wading through your roads against the rally, and I think that's Calcutta. Thank you for being with us. It's really lovely to see that there's a huge turnover. Okay, fairly huge. All right. Well, we are going to be here today talking about Boys Don't Cry, and I think it's a very topic which is of today's time. And we have wonderful, distinguished authors in very different spheres of performances, authors, writers, actors, dancer. A lot of us may not know that. And even a filmmaker, if I'm not mistaken. As a matter of fact, Mahesh, you was it the Mango Souffle? Yeah, the Mango Souffle was his debut film, and directed and written also Morning Raga. Right, okay, I'm doing fine. So we have very, very interesting perspectives to share on Boys Don't Cry, and I assure you, we're going to claim our tears through a whole lot of laughter in this evening. So the way we plan to go is going to be quite conversational, and I'm trying to see if we can get into the Adda mode, and I was trying to explain to Andrew what may be the Adda in the Calcutta context. And the closest that I could get to was maybe chatting over food and wine like Paris would do, you know, for hours. Yes, where's the wine? We do ask the AKLF team, where's the wine? At least we have some tea around, samosas somewhere around. Okay, so I think to just begin with and to get with our discussion on Boys Don't Cry, masculinity and gender, I think it'll be interesting for us to share that just a couple of months back, very, very recently, the APA, the American Psychological Association, which is still considered to be the largest accrediting body for psychological programs in the United States, and thereby to the rest of the world, fortunately or unfortunately, has actually for the first time come up with guidelines for masculinity in order to be able to identify harmful impacts on boys and men for traditional aspects of masculinity, breeding a kind of, let's say, toxic masculinity. So I think today's discussion through the works of the various authors that we have here is going to take us to a very interesting opening up of many nuances of gendered upbringing and existence. And let's say, in order to create a provoking situation, I would open up to all three of the panelists is, what is it that bugs you about masculinity? Yeah. So, and Andrew burst out in laughing, and I think he would take it off, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I think it was working. Yeah, it is. I think what bugs me the most is when somehow the traditional definitions of masculinity leave me out of it in some way. That somehow the definition of man is some idea out there that doesn't count the data of someone like me who's kind of emotional and doesn't ever really get angry and is willing to talk about anything and spent the day shopping with my friend Sue down at the mall. I think that's part of being a man. It must be part of being a man because I'm a man and I did it. But it's always discounted in these definitions. And I just think, well, then the definitions must not make any sense. And that these particular men are using them to circle one category of incredibly toxic activities that are mostly violent to me. And I also feel bad for those men for not being able to have any way to express themselves except anger and violence. Unfortunately, it impacts everyone else, but I see it most toxically in my own president seems to represent the worst of masculinity with no thought for anyone else, but no thought at all. He just assumes that his gut, which is substantial, is right about everything. That he doesn't have to dress in any sort of regal way because he's a dude. His tie goes down to the floor. It has tape on the back of it, and he's a man. But to me, it's sad because he's the most empty. If this is the greatest version of a man that the United States can come up with, it's so sad and empty that it shows what a meaningless category masculinity would be. I mean, you have to agree with that, yeah.
Excuse me. I don't know. I'm not sure there's anything about masculinity that bugs me, but what bugs me is perceived masculinity, which is what I think we're really talking about, is the perception that if you're a male, you are the doer, and if you're female, you are the receiver. Even in simple things like, you tell a boy, don't go out late at night, and you tell a girl, you can't go out late at night, right? So it's that perception that men have to do, which means that men cannot reflect, they cannot experience emotions, and hence the title Boys Don't Cry. That anything that is of the experiential nature, which requires, reflection and thought, is denied in that sense because men have to constantly do. That perception is something that bugs me immensely.
I think in my case, what has always bugged me is the sort of the demarcation and separation of areas of this is a masculine activity and this is a feminine activity, which sort of goes back to a bit what Mahesh was saying. And sometimes, it's not just about boys playing with trucks and girls playing with dolls or something like that. But I think it goes back to, enormously about physical spaces. I mean, I remember as a kid that whenever I would go to a family wedding with my sister, there was an immediate sense of, okay, I'll back up and say, when I was a kid growing up at home, we had less of those divisions. My sisters, who was older than me, would play badminton with her friends, and they would sort of make me their shuttle boy, and we'd like go and pick up the shuttle, and if you pick it up 10 times, we'll let you play for 3 minutes or something like that. But I was part of that world. But as soon as we went to a family wedding or something, it was immediately assumed that the men were in the outer room talking with each other, and that the women and the girl cousins were in the room behind. And I would always feel trapped because I would suddenly, for the first time, feel that I wanted to be in one room, but I should be in the other room, because otherwise, it felt awkward to me. So it was the first time I suddenly would become aware of my gender and where it was placing me. And that would bug me because it felt suddenly that it was sort of my freedom of movement, my sense of who I am, it was being rapidly, being eroded. But on the flip side, I also see it now. I know I have a gay friend who says it's enormously frustrating for him to be a gay man who actually loves sports and is not into any kind of camp. And so he sometimes goes to a gay party and he feels out of place, where people think of him as too straight acting and conforming, whereas, he just genuinely loves sports, but he happens to be gay and he finds less space for that. So I think it's not that, we all do it to ourselves because we have these notions of what masculine, feminine means. And even as we try to step out of it, we sometimes step and create other boxes of our own.
It's quite amazing for me, I think, what Sandip just said, to grow up with this kind of, and even what Mahesh was saying, Andrew was saying, to grow up, all these three men here in the panel, with this kind of expectation out of them, and yet to turn out to be very, very independent individuals. Lovely. So the adda is happening. Wonderful. We could have forced for the wine as well. You see, it may have been just possible. So I'm almost embarrassed now. Please pardon me. It's all for the guests. It's not for me. And the audience, if you are brave enough, you can
ask a question, you might get a samosa.
That's it. Sandip just said, if you ask a question, you might get one. All right. I'm loving this winter adda. I think it's phenomenal that the three authors, the three panelists that I have, that they've grown up with this expectation in them and have worked quite on their own in a certain way to turn out to be who they are, and to wade against a massive tide of expectation. I think that's phenomenal. Speaking about, spatial discriminations that Sandip just mentioned, I'd actually like to, ask Mahesh if it's possible for you to share your thoughts. You've worked on the stage, particularly I'm thinking about being a dancer. And the performing world has a very strong, I would say, binary opposition in treating bodies on stage, movements, bodies on stage. And I was wondering how you have dealt with it, if you would like to share anything from that.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I've understood what. Is this working? Yeah. What are the binaries again?
The binaries of the male-female body and the way the body moves.
Okay. Yeah.
Roles.
Roles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Roles as in R-O-L-E-S?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, very famous voice teacher, I know it's connected to dance, I'll come to that, said something, and I was fortunate enough to actually learn from her in my formative years, Patsy Rodenberg. She said that there is a difference between the male voice and the female voice, because this whole thing about being blind to gender doesn't work at all, right? It's the same with dance, you know. It's biology, right? It's where the bumps are. It's to do with the way you're wired, right? You can, I think traditional dance, Indian dance, had these binaries, but they also crossed them. I think there was a certain sophistication in that. Like you had the Tandav Nritya, which was usually the dance of Shiva, the more forceful, the more vigorous one. And you had the Lasya, which is the grace, right? But we've seen dancers transgress that. Traditional dancers, I'm talking about traditional dancers, even before the sexless body became, part of modern dance. You had Ananda Tandava, which is the vigor of masculine dance, but at the same time the beauty and stillness of the feminine. Right? So in that sense, there were these crossovers. To me, what actually inspired me to write Dance Like a Man was the fact that we perceive ourselves to be progressive and say, oh, we are crossing gender lines, but actually you're subscribing to the masculinist perception. I'll give you the example, is that if a woman does something that is traditionally done by a man, that, oh, now we have women who are doctors, or now we have women who are engineers and scientists, that's considered progressive. But the minute you have a man who wants to knit or wants to be a homemaker, that's seen as sissy, right? So that's not being progressive at all. What you're saying is, in effect, you're saying that the woman is almost as good as a man if she can do this. So you're not in any way changing your masculinist, for want of a better word, perception. And you're lying to yourself that you're being progressive, right? I think the performing arts have crossed these boundaries quite some time ago. The perception of dance by non-performers, that's an entirely different story. Right. Just as you say, boys don't cry, boys don't dance, and women don't do splits, and women. There's this famous story of the competition between Shiva and Parvati, and she's just as good a dancer as he is, and where she loses is when Shiva finally does the split. And she cannot do it because that would be immodest for a woman.
He raises his leg up straight up and touches by the hand. And yes, the woman can't part her legs.
Well, she can, but
only
if she does, then
only in special occasions.
Yeah, but I think it's perfectly possible biologically for the women to do a
Absolutely, we've been
split.
trained that way.
Yeah, we've been trained that way.
Yeah.
That's the point.
I think what I'll be intrigued to know, and this could be open to all the three panelists, is how your reading of masculinity has worked, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, both, in constructing characters in your works. And that also gives us an opportunity for the audience to come closer to your works, to your creation, to your maybe thought process.
I'm a novelist. I'm not a dancer, filmmaker, playwright, but I have often found that I prefer to write from the point of view of a woman, and that when I try to write from the point of view of a man, this sounds so strange, I can't understand what he would be thinking. And I can't explain that at all. It could be, I have no experience being a woman, but for some reason, my imagination is able to go there more easily than it is into the minds of many, because I think it's too fraught for me to, if I get it wrong, I'm supposed to know what it's like to be a man, and I don't. So if I get it wrong, it's a failure. Whereas people read my books and they say, I can't believe you were able to write as a woman, as if that's some magical feat. And of course, probably writing that way is me trying to try on a dress in a way, to try on that side of me. And I haven't tried on the, I'm not interested in trying on the super masculine side. I don't think I would ever want to write that kind of book.
You don't want to write the Trump book?
The Trump book, it doesn't, oh my God, it just seems miserable. I just think those must be the most unhappy people on earth, even though they own everything. I wouldn't want to be in that mind for a moment. But now I've forgotten what I was going to say. Good enough. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, because it's in response to what Andrew said. I just happened to read the first couple of pages of Less, right? And there's this beautiful image of this man waiting for someone who is to meet, and she doesn't recognize him because she's looking for a woman, right? And the description of the man, leg crossed and sandal dangling on one foot with the heel slipped off, right? I think that's very male, right? Now, I have been in a similar position like Andrew, is that I feel differently. I feel that I can write about men, but it's not the kind of perception of a man which people subscribe to. So sometimes they feel, oh, you know, his female characters are much stronger. So that's my response to your idea that you can't think from the point of view of a man. I think within those 2 pages, I know you do, but it's not something that people, it'll require a very special eye as mine. Yes.
It's reminding of one thing in a book I wrote that was the strangest sentence I ever wrote. It's from the point of view of a woman, and she's looking at her husband, who is a mystery to her, and she's imagining what it must be like to be a man and have to be right about things all the time. Story of a marriage. And I remember after I wrote it, and I said, I am a man imagining what it's like for a woman to imagine what it's like to be a man. So it's really easy, you know.
Have you put on enough hats at some point? But before I go into my work, a couple of things that came up, you know, from what you were saying, Mahesh, about what it's like when a woman does supposedly masculine things and admired. I mean, I've noted this all along, where you would see Bollywood films and things where, or even a Satyajit Ray's film like Shamapti, starring a young Aparna Sen, you know, the word as a tomboy. And tomboy is a term of sort of endearment for a girl. You know, ultimately she must be tamed and become the good wife. But for the while that she's a tomboy, people are indulgent. Sissy is never a term of endearment, even though in practical terms they are the opposite of each other. And so that's exactly where the problem lies, because a girl doing masculine things is looked to as aspiring higher, and the person and a man doing feminine things is supposedly degrading himself somehow. And I think some of you know, and even whenever I get on these panels, I end up talking about Bengali soap operas because my mother watches them and I get them by sort of intravenous drip. And a lot of them often these days are trying to tackle supposedly progressive issues. So there's divorce, there's having someone's had a child out of wedlock, you know, so doing with adoption, you know, and all kinds of issues. But within that, domestic violence and all of that. But within that, I have yet to see any Bengali soap opera where a man, even the good men in the soap opera, ever makes himself a cup of tea. He will walk into that frame, you know, and then he'll say, oh, ha, Shobita, a cup cha hole to hoy, like a cup of tea would be nice. And some woman, and the women are now being shown as going to work and they teach. Mostly somehow they seem to be singers. That seems to be the default profession for women in serials. They're singers. But whatever it is, they're going out of the house to work and everything. As long as it's in the, but when it comes to making that cup of tea, and there was an episode where this man and his wife, and the wife has been thrown out of the house, and then she comes back in disguise, because apparently it's very easy for a woman to disguise herself, because you come back as what is known in Bengali as a Hindustani maid. So which basically means you wear your sari and you wear your ghungat really low, and then nobody in the house can recognize you anymore as the daughter-in-law of the house. And how does the husband, and the husband who's lived with her is unable to recognize that this maid running around the house is actually his wife, until she makes him a cup of tea. And then he has that tea and he says, that tea, it's like, oh, your voice didn't remind me, your hand touch didn't remind me, your gait didn't remind me, your physique didn't remind me, but the taste of that cup of tea suddenly reminded me. So, there are so many ways that this kind of things are coded in us. It's just ridiculous when you come to think of it. But in terms of like characters, when I write, I think when you say that, but I was thinking about it when you talked about that, Andrew, and I think there probably is deep down, as somebody who's grown up, in some ways always feeling that I was not fitting into standard notions of masculinity that were around me, even if I'm not being bullied for it, even if I'm not being, harassed about it, but I know that I'm not fitting into the assigned boxes. So there is probably a certain nervousness in me when I write male characters, because I feel still that I might be exposed in some way as a bit of a fraud, because I have spent a lot of my life pretending to be those characters when I've not really fit comfortably into that box. And that might be working somewhere deep down. Whereas when I write a woman's character, I feel freer, because I feel that the
male writing, or writing of male characters and female characters. This very famous male cross-dresser was asked, I forget who, very famous, the name escapes me, was in an interview, and he came to the interview dressed in a skirt and tights and high heels, and with makeup on and a blouse. And the interview asked, why are you wearing women's clothes, right? And he just sort of looked at her and says, oh, these are not women's clothes. I bought them. So that's perception.
I think this is getting quite intriguing, and I believe the three panelists are talking about holding a psychic structure which has overlapping notions of masculinity and femininity. As a matter of fact, masculinities and femininities. And they are overlapping, they are in flux. And I think that is the most intriguing area. As a matter of fact, I was thinking when Sandip was talking just a while back, and I was thinking of Romola, and I mentioned it to you when we were having our previous Adda, from the book Don't Let Him Know. And it's a profound moment that Sandip creates, where Romola, as a young girl, and very differently, I mean, the girl is discovering her quite active persuasion in sexuality with another young boy. And at the same time, that's where the narrative has the girl's father breathing his last. And I was wondering if you would like to talk about this poignant moment that...
Sure. What's interesting, Jhuma, is that when I had initially written a version of that story as a short story, it was a boy. It was a little boy who is having these sex games with a slightly older girl. and he knows at the same time, he's a little boy, he knows his father has died. Nobody is telling him this. And he's basically playing these sex games with this girl while the family is getting the body ready to bring the boy to him. Only he knows that it's already happened. But when I was writing it as the novel, as Don't Let Him Know, it actually made perfect sense that it would be Romula's story as opposed to her husband's story, because, and when I changed the pronouns, as it were, the story just jumped. Because, that the power of what you were talking about, the power of the little girl and who manipulates a slightly older boy into him dropping his pants and showing her, becomes absolutely radically different than a little, chota sa boy ordering a slightly older maid to do something like that. And that moment becomes really poignant for me, because then there's this little girl who is close to her father and knows that the father has died, and nobody's telling her. They brought her to her neighbor's house to shelter her from this truth, and they've sent the kids to play on the roof together, and she's using her secret knowledge of this to manipulate this boy into doing her bidding, and that creates immense sense of guilt in her. And then that's where sort of this femininity, masculinity comes in, is then she realizes this is something she will never, ever be able to talk about anymore. So once you've done that and that's where, like, boys can boast about certain exploits, or are allowed to boast about to certain people. But in her case, she realizes that as the good girl, she can never admit to anyone what she has, that at the moment of her father's death, she was, playing sex games with another boy.
I think the juxtaposition of death and the birth of one's identity, a sexual identity, is so poignant and dramatic at the same time. I was just wondering, coming to Andrew, I'm just curious. I'm not sure if I wrote that in the mail, but I'm wondering that in the book Less, where you are writing about Arthur finding his ways of finding himself, actually, after a heartbreak, and finding his grounds in a way. I'm intrigued. If you were to, creatively think of constructing this character with an Indian context, what kind of, just for a creative kick, perhaps, I'm intrigued. What kind of, ways would one be looking at, possibly exploring to take care of a heartbreak, a disastrous heartbreak?
Well, I've been thinking, as we're talking about this, about books I've written and changes I've made in the books. Sorry. Changing the gender or the race of the characters, and I think I've always done it. I've always needed to do it because I've discovered that the character I'm writing with has no conflict inherent in their position. And in writing about Arthur Less as an American, I had trouble with him. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. We're too close together.
I'm liking it.
I was unable to find the right conflict for him, so instead I was able to make it a comedy, and that provided the conflict was the narrator sort of playing with his situation. And of course, you mean setting the whole story in India, or having an Indian man traveling the world. Well, this is for you to write. It would be very hard for me to write, but I think it comes with a built-in conflict, a difficulty in traveling the world that Arthur Less doesn't have. That would be interesting. Visas, for instance.
You just wouldn't be able to travel the world. Getting a visa for all those countries would be impossible.
That would be the comedy of it, would be the visa process.
The Indian version of it is that he never leaves.
He never goes.
He just keeps going to the visa office.
It could be just the visa applications would be the novel. Yeah, all the filling in, all of the details of the. Well, now that's a pretty good idea. Thank you.
Sorry, you wanted to
No.
say? Mahesh, you want to comment and say something?
No, because I haven't read them.
Okay. I think I'm going to take one more question from our end, and then you'll be happy to know that it'll be open for you to interact directly with the panelists. Just to once again widen up our discussion, on one hand, the authors and the creations, and on the other hand, a larger framework of looking at masculinity in today's time. And standing at the juncture where Me Too has given us a voice to be able to articulate all that was quote unquote shameful and hidden for a whole lot of us women regarding sexual assaults and experiences. I would like to actually open up to our three panelists is that what you may have to talk about vis-a-vis the Me Too and masculinity, vis-a-vis the silences of sexual assault that men would have to undergo even in today's time. And I wonder if we are in the process of creating a platform to be able to address these aspects, or is it not articulated at all?
I'll just say very briefly, I mean, I think that's absolutely critical. Hopefully it will happen. But, when the rape laws were being changed, there was a move to try and make both the victim and the perpetrator gender neutral, as in men could be raped. And in the end, they were not able to do it. So in this country, it's still only women who can be raped. Men cannot be raped. So men can have the Section 377, which was just read down very deliberately. It had to be read down and not discarded because it decriminalized consensual sex between two adults. But it left it in there, so if the sex was not consensual, you could still, if my understanding is right, you can still use 377 to prosecute it because male rape is not covered under the other rape laws. And that creates a giant silence and a stigma where rape itself has stigma, but at least through Me Too and other campaigns, there are more and more voices speaking out about it. There are women, for example, right in Calcutta, there was the rape victim who said, I won't be a victim, I will show my face, I will come on television and talk about it, and that created huge news because usually in India, rape victim names are not public, if they appear on screen, usually the face is sort of digitized or something. And this woman created a huge furor by saying, no, I will be visible. But for men, even that space is not there because under the law, men cannot be raped. And so the stigma of the man who is raped and is even unable to talk about that is enormous. And that is, that is a different breathing ground for a toxic kind of masculinity that we can't even begin to address unless we address the fundamental issue in the room. And it is striking that in all this Me Too that's coming out, that there have not been more cases of men who are victims, maybe of other men, in the Me Too thing. And there are, obviously, they're there. But it is still so hard for a man to stand up and say, it's the thing. I'd stand up and say that I have, been sexually assaulted, and I didn't say anything at that time.
I think this is the perfect example of what I set off earlier about the perception that men do and do not experience, and women, it's the reverse. So there are actually sexist men, they may not be, they are getting less and less space, fortunately, who would say that, oh, this Me Too campaign is, women are taking advantage of, this whole campaign and making false accusations. It's the same mentality which does not honor the fact that men can be raped as well, because it's women can't do, which means they cannot protest, and men can't experience the trauma of rape, right? So it's two sides of the same coin. Having said that, I do not believe that men should jump on the Me Too campaign. Let me just elaborate on that, is that I think for the first time we're getting a proactive approach to rape and sexual abuse by women who have started this Me Too campaign, and we must respect and honor that space, right? Now, if we as men say, oh, what about men too? We too get raped and we should also be a part of that, we're doing the same thing. We're saying that we are the doers. We're taking away the action from the women. I'm not sure I'm making myself clear, but I think that men who want to express any kind of trauma they've been to, especially sexual abuse or psychological even, should start their own campaign, but not jump onto the Me Too campaign.
I'll come to Andrew, but I just thought I would like to respond to Mahesh. I think it would be a jumping into this campaign of Me Too, because men have to first start the narrative history of talking about sexual assaults by toxic masculinity, which talks about themselves, which they, I think, for even in a societal upbringing in familial structures, this is hardly something men talk about. And I think what Sandip was saying, that it is a taboo for a man. I have friends who've talked about being sexually molested by teachers only for the first time by the time they hit 40. Not before that have they talked about it. And I think there is an unconscious element that if I'm touched as a man by as a little boy or a young man by another man, then maybe I fall into the category of being a woman, lesser man. I don't know. I mean, it's a provocating area, and we wouldn't possibly have enough time. But I would like Andrew to share.
Well, I can say that I went through something that I think a lot of people did when the Me Too movement, when Harvey Weinstein got taken down, and it began, and I began hearing stories from female friends of mine or reading stories, that I sat and had to think, of course, how I had treated women. You know, as a gay man, I still have to have some introspection about how I've treated women in my life and men, and then had to go in the way that you think about what happened at the party last night and what you said and maybe how did it go back and think and realize that things that happened to me that I had misunderstood, that I had been fooled into thinking were okay when I was, I mean, it's traumatic to go back, liberating, and sift through everything and realize that it didn't go as well as I thought it had, and that I had been too ashamed of things. And I'm not the only person in this crowd. A lot of women it's happened, and men too. But I do think that in general, my attitude towards feminism, and this panel is a bad example, is that men should shut up. I should shut up and let women talk. And I'm happy to support them and say, I know some of what you might be going through, but why don't I listen to your story?
Thank you. I think now you should be happy to have a direct chance to interact with, yes, many hands going up. All right, you can all have your claim to the samosas.
Rag. Okay, done. Done. 。 . 。 . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 。 . 。 。 。 。 。 . 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。 。  。
No? Yeah, now. Now. Yeah. Hello. So my question is, what would you say on the rejection of the new Gillette ad? I mean, it's, it just came out and it has got 1 million downvote where it talks about raising our boys as men. I don't know whether you are familiar with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, 1 million downvote, I think after Justin Bieber it's the first time, I'm not sure. So, what would you say about it?
I haven't seen it.
You must, you must.
I know.
I seem to be the only one who's seen it. See, I'm more interested in watching men than men are.
Okay, so I would request you all to please watch it.
Well, I think it's a desperate attempt to make a different narrative come across, and I appreciate that. But I am a little apprehensive about this kind of juxtaposition by the ad world and what actually they would be having in mind, to market. That's all that I can say.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll have all the panelists walking down for you with the samosas. He said it. All right, bravo.
Three more plates.
6 questions we can take.
Good evening. I am Auritra Basu, a student of the Department of English at Jadavpur University. My question is, how would you say masculinity as an institution should go about the process of unlearning so that they don't feel offended at the new Gillette, at things like Gillette, the new Gillette ad, which proposes masculinity to be something which it has not been hitherto, that is commonsensical and sensitive. Thank you.
In general, how do you go about unlearning it?
Unlearning masculinity, I think, is by listening. It's what Andrew said, that I think, that's what femininity has to teach us, and that's why feminism is so important for us to listen and unlearn. People are constantly ask, why do we need feminism? And I know a lot of anti-feminists who raise this thing. That's because we've had masculinism for thousands of years. So I think unlearning begins with listening. Oh, you're gonna you get a samosa
Okay,
as well.
the samosa is down the alley.
I do. I was thinking earlier about how I had learned masculine. Well done. I remember moving to from New York City to the Rocky Mountains up near Canada in the snowy area where there's cowboys and more sheep than people, very rural, very masculine. And I had to learn, if I was sitting to wait for my friends in a bar, fights would break out all the time, just like the movies, kind of. And I had to learn how to sit in a way where men would not notice me. And I had to remind myself all the time to sit like this because it was dangerous for me not to. And so unlearning, well, I wasn't sitting like that in front of you. I mean, it's something, I'm trying to unlearn it by giving myself license to move my body differently. That seems to be, for me, the way to feel safe.
Can I? That just reminded me, I know, like right here in Kolkata, a city that's supposed to be more in touch with its creative side, my partner, when he was a student, and he went to take language classes, as a lot of us did when we were getting into college. Everybody felt like we should study French or German for whatever strange reason. And so he goes to Ramakrishna Mission to enroll for classes. And they said, wait. And he was sitting like this. And somebody came and told him, put your legs, someone at the institution said, put your legs down straight. And he was like, what? He's like, boys don't sit like that in this institution. He was like, I guess I'm not taking language classes here, and walked out. So even something as simple as this becomes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shalini Chakraborty, and I'm from Jadavpur University. Dattani sir, I just finished reading 30 Days in September, and I'm currently obsessing with it. So I just wanted to ask that the counselor for the entire play is left ungendered, and for most part of it, Deepak plays the role of the counselor. And is it somehow to kind of juxtapose the man and Deepak and the kind of masculinities, even though Deepak doesn't compromise with his masculinity, so as to say, but he kind of becomes the sensitive to us, at least to hear out what Mala has to say. So would you kindly comment on that?
I think, yes, I've been asked that question earlier. I think Deepak is a bad counselor. I think although he wants to be sensitive, he wants to help. But I think again in playing the role of the rescuer, he is playing a masculine role again. And there is that scene which is constantly underplayed in productions, I don't know why, where Mala turns back to him and says, "You can't understand, you just don't understand. If you think it's so easy that I could forget things." I think I need to do something. I always think I need to rewrite that scene, because some productions play it that, oh, you know, it takes a man to rescue a woman who's been abused by a man. So either the perpetrator or the rescuer, both roles allotted to men. Right? And that, I think, needs to be broken. That's why I left the counselor ungendered. And in the film version that I directed, yes, I did. I actually had a woman sitting there as the counselor, as the listener. Yeah.
You get a samosa. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, you should get 2 samosas for that question.
Okay, we have the men serving you. This is wonderful. Change of roles.
Good evening, sir, ma'am. So my question is to Dattani sir. Sir, hello sir. I am a huge fan of yours. I have read your plays a lot, both in text and out of the text. But my question is that you have dealt with these 2 binaries, the male and the female, and obviously the in-between that comes emerging. And my question is to you that would you please share a few lines, a few thoughts on how you discovered this, these 2 binaries working with each other while portraying them in your plays? And we as future writers, how should we discover these 2 binaries or portray them as in this society things come and go and it keeps changing. So at this point of time, at this stage, what should we look up to and how should we portray both binaries? I mean binaries, I mean both the male and female thoughts, not the 2 sexes. The thinking capability and all between.
Yeah. Oh dear, it's always difficult answering about your own work, isn't it? Well, I think you should get the samosa right away. I see, you know, I'm still in a process of learning about the binaries. I don't actually see them as binaries. I see cultural construction as binaries. I do see the artificial constructions of male and female as the opposites. Whereas what my characters, at least I think they do aspire for, is a true voice, which is not in the extremes. That they will only find redemption when they discover their true voice, whether it is through dance in Dance Like a Man, or whether it's through music in Morning Raga, or it's just an understanding of the other. And Tara, again, is always seen as binaries, as male and female, and it's about genders and social. But actually, it is about the male self and the female self. You know, that is what I've concluded about my own works. So I don't know, without rambling on about my work, I think just read what you and what interests you and how do you respond to it personally, rather than seeing it as an external construct. Because then there's the danger that whatever you analyze will be in the region of the artificial construction that society prescribes. I think it's very, very important that you respond to it personally, and whatever that is, positive, negative, life-affirming or not, it is your response, and then it adds value to it.
Thank you, Mahesh. And though we have some more samosas left, but unfortunately we don't have...
We'll eat them.
We'll eat them, yes. Mahesh suggested we're going to steal them to the next room and we'll eat them. But I thank all of you for being with us this evening. I thank the panelists. It's been an absolute delight to be with all three of you, an honor to be with all three of you. And more to Claiming Tears. Thank you.
Thank you, Jhuma.
I'd like to just take a moment now to say this, that these, I think, binaries of masculinity and femininity that have been talked about, in my very, very humble opinion, I feel they're problematic in two particular ways. One in which Sandip sir was saying that by talking about how a woman may be as good as a man, but it's never good for a man to be like a woman, we sort of further this existing gender divide, because you are essentially subjugating womanhood and femininity. And I think perhaps more problematically what it does is that it fails to accommodate, it's exclusionary because it fails to accommodate those who identify as gender non-conforming or do not, or are ambiguous about their gender identity. So thank you so, so much, Andrew sir, Mahesh sir, Jhuma ma'am, and Sandip sir, for being with us this evening for such a wonderful session. I don't think we could have ended the second day of this festival on a better and more profound note. Thank you so much. I'd request you to proceed towards the Delegates Lounge for the media interaction. Just a reminder that we will very shortly be having book signing sessions with Mahesh Dattani and Andrew Sean Greer at the spot that we have right next to the Oxford Bookstore corner. So please do join us for that. And with that, we will be calling it a wrap for the second day of AKLF 2019. Be sure to join us for the final day of the festival tomorrow. We start right at 12 and we have some very interesting sessions lined up for tomorrow. On an ending note, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for AKLF 2019, our institutional partners, development consultants, Tolly Club, Kolkata Center for Creativity, Getty Institute, Aliofra, US Consulate General, Calcutta, the Consulate General of Italy, the Australian Council for Arts, and INTAC, our session partners Kalam, Zuban and Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the India Foundation for the Arts, our wellness partner VLCC, our quick food partners Gupta Brothers and Wow Momo, our food partner Food for You, food and beverage partner Cha Bar, our hospitality partner The Park Hotel, and tea partner Taifu, alongside our Let's Celebrate Park Street theme partners Bisho Bangla, India Hobby Centre, Momoso, Topsel Toyota, Bingshu Shotabdi, Burlington, Matthew, Subway, Nexa, Hard Rock Cafe, The Park, Fleury's, Thai Spa, Don Giovanni's, and Berger Paints, to name a few. Thank you so much. Have a very good evening.